Think about your all-time favorite game, the one that you keep coming back to no matter how many times you've played it. Have you ever heard anyone else talk about it? Would you consider it an underrated gem? Everyone has their preferences, and with so many games available, your top pick is likely different from someone else's. There are countless videos out there ranking things like the top 10 Super Nintendo games or the best RPGs of all time. And while those are interesting topics, the lists are based on the player's experiences and taste. I think it's more interesting to share the games that I always return to when I'm unsure of what to play. Instead of narrowing it down to a single console and giving my top 5, I'm going to highlight my favorite games to replay across all of Nintendo's consoles and handhelds, and give myself about a minute to talk about each game. I am by no means saying these games are the best on their respective consoles. These are merely the games that I find myself playing when I have a free pocket of time. If you disagree with any of my picks, let me know down in the comment section below. But for now, let's dive in. Before we get into the main list, I would like to bring up some honorable mentions. These games were just barely off from making the list, but I felt the need to bring them up as they are still some of my favorite games of all time, and I do find myself playing them from time to time. Mega Man 2 was one of the first Mega Man games I had ever played. When I was younger, I went into a weird Mega Man phase and loved the two games on PSP. And when it was time to move away from the PSP, I decided to buy Mega Man 2 on my iPod Touch. And it wasn't exactly the best way to experience that game, but it was certainly a unique one. I actually ended up beating the game on that iPod Touch, and it just gave me a greater appreciation for the game when I finally decided to play it on original hardware and just the number of re-releases across the years. Goof Troop is a childhood favorite of mine. Whenever I think back to my childhood playing Super Nintendo with my brother, Goof Troop is the first game that comes to mind. It is so much fun exploring the puzzles and trying not to hit each other with your little grappling hooks or kicking the stones into each other to lose lives. If you're ever looking for a nice little co-op puzzle solving game, Goof Troop is kind of just the best there is on the Super Nintendo. Kind of think of it like multiplayer Zelda before Four Swords was a thing. Jet Force Gemini is a third-person shooter on the Nintendo 64, and I find myself coming back to it. Not really the Nintendo 64 version though. They did end up re-releasing it for the Rare Replay collection on Xbox with modern controls, and it is easily one of the best ways to experience this gem. It is not the best shooter in the world, and it certainly has not aged the greatest, but if you're looking for some nice third-person shooter action on the Nintendo 64, you really can't go wrong with Jet Force Gemini. And the multiplayer is pretty fun too. Mario Superstar Baseball is one of the unique cases in which it's a sports game for a sport I've barely played, and yet I cannot stop booting this game up from time to time and just playing a few innings. The story mode is goofy, the exhibition mode is super fun just to play with friends. There's an arcade, like casino mode. I don't remember exactly what it's called off the top of my head, but that was so much fun. Just overall, the game is an absolute blast. Not only the game, but also the commercials. I remember these playing on TV back when I was a kid and just falling in love with these costumes. I wish that Nintendo would do more advertisements like these days because they are so iconic. Rounding off the honorable mentions section is Game & Watch Gallery 4 for the Game Boy Advance. This game saved me from many car trips when I was a kid. Just playing through a few of the high score based, very easy to learn, hard to master micro games that are in this collection is so much fun. I could play Fire for hours of my time. Boxing is fun. Donkey Kong Jr. is so much fun. If you're ever looking for a game to download either on a Delta emulator or you have a Game Boy Advance available to you, there really is no better game to kill 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour with than Game & Watch Gallery 4.
Nintendo Entertainment System.
Power! Now, you are playing with power.
Mike Tyson's Punch-Out is easily one of my favorite games of all time. It's this unique mix of rhythm and fighting game that I just cannot get enough of. Learning the patterns of each unique opponent, learning their quirks, learning the timing, it's so engaging. I own this game on pretty much every system I can get my hands on. I've got it on the Delta emulator on my phone. I've got it on my 3DS through Virtual Console. I put it on my Steam Deck. And it's one of the first games I play whenever I dig out the NES Classic. No matter how many times I beat Glass Joe, I will always try my best to get a better time. And I'm typically pretty good about knocking him down in the first 43 seconds. To this day, I still haven't beaten Mike Tyson, but soon I will, and I will earn that title. If you have an opportunity to play any of the games, Punch-Out, Super Punch-Out, or Punch-Out on Wii, I honestly cannot recommend them enough.
Game Boy.
頼むよ。
4つのゲームが2つのモードで新登場。
Okay, I know I brought up Game & Watch Gallery 4 in the honorable mentions, but hear me out. Game & Watch Gallery for the original Game Boy was my first experience with the Game & Watch Gallery series as a whole. I went over to a friend of mine's house, and his older brother had a Game Boy Color, Mario Deluxe, and Game & Watch Gallery for the original Game Boy. And I remember playing Fire for the very first time on that Game Boy Color and just falling in love with the game. So then when I finally picked up Game & Watch Gallery 4 years later and finding out that it had my favorite game from that original game on it, I was so happy. However, coming back to this game every once in a while is just so nostalgic for me. And while I love the updated aesthetic from the Game Boy Advance game, Game & Watch Gallery 1 just has a certain charm to it that cannot be beaten. Absolutely gorgeous sprite work, catchy tunes. You really can't go wrong with this game. I reshelled a DMG that I got from a flea market a handful of years ago, and this was one of the first games I loaded onto a flash cart that I got at the same time, and I spent the remainder of that day trying to set a high score in Fire. And that's not even mentioning the other 3 games on this cart. Manhole is easily the hardest of the 4. Octopus is more timing based than anything. And Oil Panic, while I might not understand it and I just don't really enjoy this game that much, it's still fun to go to every once in a while. Not only do you have updated versions of all of these games on here, you also have the original Game & Watch versions as well. So technically it's 8 games in one cart, but really I just come back to the updated games. The modern games is what they call them, because they are just so well done. If you find yourself looking for a quick time waster, Game & Watch Gallery is just such a good time.
Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
Do is go to Blockbuster Video, rent and play Tetris Attack. You'll get a free Super NES game rental, plus a chance to win a Nintendo 64 Entertainment Center.
Tetris Attack was always the black sheep of my childhood Super Nintendo collection. Next to Pushover, it was just kind of the game that sat unplayed for years. Until I finally decided to play it and realized it is probably one of the most addicting puzzle games ever made. Known better by its name these days, Puzzle League. Tetris Attack is your standard line 4 up and you win sort of puzzle game, where combos are key. I grew up more with Tetris Attack's younger brother, Pokemon Puzzle League on the Nintendo 64, but this version of the game is still the one I go back to these days. And if I don't have access to an emulator or my Super Nintendo Classic or really any other hardware that has this game installed, I don't mind playing Panel de Pon, the Japanese version of this game, on the Nintendo Switch Online service. Puzzle League is actually one of my wife's favorite puzzle games, or just games in general, so I feel like if I didn't mention it, I would probably never hear the end of it. It's easy to learn, hard to master, and it's just a delight for the eyes. It's definitely one of the best that the Super Nintendo has to offer when it comes to graphics and music.
Game Boy Color.
Okie dokie, here we go. Mamma mia, that's some.
Mario Golf on the Game Boy Color is not a game that I grew up with, it's actually more of a recent discovery. The only 2 Mario Golf games that I played up to this point were Mario Golf Toadstool Tour on the GameCube and Mario Golf Super Rush on the Switch. And while in one of my Mario Golf moods, I decided to try Mario Golf on the Game Boy Color. And it is surprisingly good for a mobile version of Mario Golf for the Nintendo 64 that released in 1999 for the Game Boy Color. Completely ignoring the story mode that this game has to offer, it's just a very basic version of the Mario Golf gameplay that was on the Nintendo 64. It's actually pretty impressive. So if I find myself in a mood where I want to play some Mario Golf but don't exactly have a more powerful handheld on me, I find myself playing an entire 18-hole course and vibing along to the delightful chiptune soundtrack. And while it's not my personal recommendation for somebody's first Mario Golf game, it's pretty nice to have on a phone emulator or on a Game Boy Flash cart, just for a quick game of golf.
Nintendo 64.
Yo, listen up.
We will not live in a two-dimensional world.
We won't go in one direction or see what we can say.
Okay, this might be considered a cop-out, but I don't care. Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64. This game, like many others, was my very first 3D game, and it was wholly my own. My brother grew up with the Super Nintendo, my younger brother grew up with the GameCube, and this was my game. This was my very favorite game on the Nintendo 64. And until just recently, I had never beaten it. I had always gotten down to the basement, and I couldn't quite get past that point. But I'm happy to say, shortly after the release of Super Mario 3D All-Stars, I have finally beaten this game. It's about damn time. It hasn't aged the best, but that's okay. I mean, they were trying their best with what they had, and they had no groundwork to go off of. So it really is a modern marvel that Mario 64 holds up as well as it does to this day. My favorite way to experience this game nowadays is the recompilation, the PC port, with Render 96 enabled, because it's a nostalgic thing, and that's how I saw the game as I was growing up. That's what I saw when I looked at these chunky polygons. I don't even have to say anything else. I don't even think I can recommend this game because I guarantee you've probably played it. However, if you haven't, the PC port is a phenomenal time. And not just PC port, it's on literally everything, so it's basically the modern version of Can It Run Doom.
Game Boy Advance.
Only in Donkey Kong Country. Swimming gorillas.
Donkey Kong Country, while a phenomenal Super Nintendo game, is one of my absolute favorite Game Boy Advance games to this day. Sure, the colors are a little blown out, and the soundtrack isn't as good, but all of the additions to this game highly outweigh those two small nitpicks from purists. The wider aspect ratio so you can see what you're coming up on, the revamped Funky's Flights, a mechanic in the game, extra collectibles, new mini-games. There really is no better way to play this game in my opinion. Growing up, anytime I was sick home from school, I would ask my mom to play Donkey Kong Country with me on the Super Nintendo. So having the game portable, playable at any time, was just mind-blowing to me as a kid. To this day, Donkey Kong Country is still one of the greatest 2D platformers, and I could not be happier that Donkey Kong is back in the spotlight.
Nintendo GameCube.
ニンニクニクニクニンニクニンはニンニクニンニンニンはニンニクはニンニクはニンニクはワリオ様だプリンプリンプリンプリン
Wario World is such a weird game. Like, it basically feels like a game that shouldn't exist, and I think for that reason alone, it is such a good time. It embodies the very what the f nature that the Wario series was going through at the time. Essentially a 3D version of the Wario Land franchise, and more specifically Wario Land 4 for the Game Boy Advance. This game is a side-scrolling beat-em-up, but not really the standard kind of beat-em-up where you clear a screen and then you move on to the next one. It's also a collectathon in a 3D platform at the exact same time. I really don't know how to explain this game without saying it's a Wario game, because it really is just its own thing, and no other games have really tried to be what Wario World was. I think my favorite part of this game is just how Wario never shuts up during the entire thing. He's constantly making noises, he's screaming, he's grunting. When you pause the game, he makes fun of you for pausing the game. It's a fever dream from start to finish, but it is easily one of my favorite games just because of how weird it is. It's an absolute blast to play, and I really hope that Nintendo makes another one or re-releases this one, because the only way to experience this game is on original hardware or through emulation, and that's a crime. I recently picked up a copy of Wario World for the GameCube so I can play it on real hardware, and I do plan on making a full review for this game once I complete it, because, man, I love this game so much. It is easily one of my favorite games of all time, and it's earned its spot on this list for sure.
Nintendo DS.
Full Metal Alchemist Dual Sympathy is, I think, the only game on this list that's not a just straight up Nintendo game. And the way that I found it is just so weird that I might as well just tell the story instead of explaining what this game is. I was on the car ride back from school one day and I decided to pull out my Action Replay and plug it into my DS. At the time, the entire cheat list was installed, so I started looking through games and was just looking for a game to play by looking at the names. And for some reason, I looked at Full Metal Alchemist Dual Sympathy and said, that sounds cool. So the next time I went to go and rent a game from Family Video, if you guys even know what that is, I picked up this game, and holy shit, this game is so much fun. It's your typical side-scrolling beat-em-up, but you can also use the touchscreen to summon things like turrets and walls to get over some of the small puzzle elements that are in the game. There are some dumb mini-games, there's an alarm clock. This game just kind of has everything. It's not the greatest game in the world, but I enjoy it so much because of the nostalgic factor.
We would like to play.
Super Smash Bros. Brawl is one of those you either love it or you hate it kind of games. I don't feel like I have to even explain what a Super Smash Bros. Game is because they kind of transcend Nintendo consoles in general and they're just known by everybody. And while the competitive scene might see Smash Bros. Brawl as the weakest iteration of the series, to me, it's easily one of the most charming, I'd say. They tried to make every single character as gritty as possible by giving, them super realistic textures. Mario has actual denim, and I think they were going for that badass aesthetic because they added Solid Snake, but then immediately followed that up by adding Sonic. I go back and play all the Smash Bros. Games here and there, but Smash Bros. Brawl is one of the ones I go back to because of the Subspace Emissary mode. And while it's kind of a slog to complete, it's fun to chip away at every once in a while.
Nintendo 3DS.
Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon was my first actual experience with a Luigi's Mansion game, besides watching my dad play the original on GameCube when I was growing up. It takes the basic Luigi's Mansion formula and kind of whittles it down to a mission-based format, and I think for quick pick-up-and-play action on a handheld, it does the job pretty well. You can kind of hop in and hop out whenever you want to, take a handful of missions down, finish one, and go on about your day, revisit one you've already beaten, and catch the boo that's hidden in that level. It's kind of just the best way to experience Luigi's Mansion in a bite-sized format. I take my modded 3DS out of the house with me quite often, and whenever I want to play something quick, don't really want to put a lot of brain power into it, I boot up Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon and finish a mission or two. Or sometimes I like to visit the multiplayer mode, the Scare Scraper, which as a kid was one of my absolute favorite things to play because my brothers would actually play along. But nowadays, playing it solo is just kind of not the vibe. There was a re-release of this game on Nintendo Switch, and I haven't really heard anything about it. It came out a handful of years ago, so I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing. I haven't played it, so I'm not sure of what quality it is. But just know that the original on Nintendo 3DS is one of the best 3D puzzle games available on the system.
one player against 4.
I can't say I revisit the Wii U very often, but when I do, I think one of the only games I tend to play is Nintendo Land. This virtual theme park full of Nintendo-based attractions was the pack-in title for the Wii U, and it did a pretty good job for people that were already Nintendo fans, but didn't capture the same sort of essence that Wii Sports did. It wasn't converting non-Nintendo fans into Nintendo fans, or converting non-gamers into gamers. It was just kind of a Nintendo game for Nintendo fans. And as a Nintendo fan, it is a lot of fun. The Wii U just kind of got asymmetrical multiplayer right, kind of ahead of its time from asymmetrical multiplayer nowadays with VR. So it's kind of cool to go back and see the beginnings of what became kind of a subgenre of gaming as a whole. This game actually replaced board games as a family game night attraction for my family for a while, and I think for that reason alone, Nintendo Land earns the spot.
Nintendo Switch.
Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics is just such a weird game, but it's easily one of the most addicting to play with friends or solo. That is, if you like board and card games. If you're not a big board or card game fan, you probably won't like this collection very much, but for someone like me, this is a super fun time. This game features certain games like Legally Distinct Yahtzee, Legally Distinct Sorry, Legally Distinct Uno, and then your basic card games like Blackjack, Poker, and President, which I didn't realize was even a thing until I started playing this, but is now easily one of my favorite card games of all time. The game weirdly has the Wii Play aesthetic, and actually features some of the sports that were featured in Wii Sports, but like miniature versions of them. Whenever the wife and I are settling down from a long day at work, we typically like to boot up Clubhouse Games and play a few rounds. And then whenever we feel like being more competitive, we boot up 6-Ball Puzzle, which sounds really unassuming on the surface, but it is easily one of the most heated gaming experiences I've ever had, and I've been playing competitive games for a very, very long time. This game is an absolute treat. If you're looking for something bite-sized to play with friends or by yourself, Clubhouse Games is a phenomenal deal. You can even pick up a physical version of it nowadays, and you can game share it through Switch and Switch 2, kind of harkening back to the OG days of DS download play. And that wraps up the list. The Nintendo Switch 2 is just a little too new, and I really only own 2 exclusive games for the console, so it would be between Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza, which Donkey Kong Bonanza absolutely clears Mario Kart World, and it's not even close. It was nice to get retrospective for a bit and take a walk down memory lane and look at these games with a more analytical lens as to why I enjoy playing them so much instead of just, picking them up, playing them for a bit, and then putting them down. A few months from now, these games could be completely different. There could be entirely different genres of games in every single category. There would just be no way to tell until the time comes. But I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble on about video games for a little while, and I hope to revisit this topic with other console libraries very, very soon. But for now, that's all I've got. Stay tuned. Have a good one.